The Gauteng Department of Education is in the spotlight after it emerged that their COVID-19 spending was much higher than expected. It cost the department at least 98 million rand to disinfect buildings and schools after the hard lockdown. Joining us now to explain how the department incurred such a staggering bill is Steve Mabona, the spokesperson for the Gauteng Education Department. Mr. Mabona, thank you very much for your time. I have very specific questions for you here. Let's start with the decontamination process of schools. Was it before or after the reopening of schools on June the 8th?
Thank you very much, Xoli. It's inclusive. When we were preparing schools, we started with the process, and continuously we then had to do it because we then had COVID-19 cases. Because remember...
Let me quickly come in there, Steve. It's inclusive, you say. So it means you disinfected before and post.
And continued with the process because, remember, protocols dictated then that if you have a positive case, you need to go through that process and make sure that actually in the initial stages we were closing buildings, we were closing schools, as you might have recalled. And the advice that we got from the Department of Health and the Provincial Command Council was that moving on, there's no need for you to close a school or an office. You need to go to areas where you think the person that has been declared positive might have went to those areas. Then you focus only on those areas. So it meant then the scope of work then had to change.
All right, Steve, we have much to get through, so I'm going to rush you a bit. Was there a need to disinfect schools between March and 8 June? Because the understanding would be no one would have occupied school buildings at that time.
Well, remember, before we opened, to allay fears, because we remember that the minister went so many times in the Court of Laws to say we want to open schools, but parents, some organizations and some parents are saying no.
Steve.
No, I'm coming. And then they said...
The question is this.
They said...
Why was there a need to disinfect schools between the period March and 8 June when schools would have been closed? No individual would have occupied school buildings at that time.
The advice, because remember we were working very closely with Department of Health, their advice then was that we need to disinfect, deep clean, make sure that the process is ready, because we were opening the schools in June. So we had to make sure that besides disinfection, there's cleaning, because not only disinfection, there was cleaning.
From which medical expert was this, Steve? Because if I read and listen to people like Professor Xoli Mngambi, they were clear that any surface that has been infected with COVID-19, it takes 3 days for the virus to disappear. Why would there be a need to disinfect schools when they have been closed for such long periods of time, unless the intention here was to loot money?
No. Don't be sidetracked. Remember, we said for us as a department to allay fears from all these organizations that were saying you cannot open schools. Let's allay fears, make sure that the schools are prepared. And the advice that we were taking as the department, we're taking the advice from the Department of Health and the Provincial Command Council. So you are mentioning the professor, which I cannot contend the facts that we are putting on the table, but I'm just saying, whatever we're doing as Department of Education, we were advised by the Department of Health and the Provincial Council. And we had to make sure that the ground is clear. We don't have any fears that will be coming from parents to say we open the school and their children are sick. And continuously, like as I said, this is inclusive. It's not only before we open the school. On a continuous basis, when a school reported a case, parents were the first to say the school must be closed. You need to make sure that you decontaminate, disinfect, and make sure that all protocols are then observed. We have to continue with that process, but in the initial stages, we were closing schools, we were closing offices, we were making sure that probably for 2 to 3 days we are at the school or at an office, make sure that we go through that process. But then, moving forward, we were advised to say, no. Now, you don't need to close a school, don't need to close an office. You need then to make sure that you identify the area where the COVID-19 positive case person would have been. Then identify those areas and focus there. So the money is inclusive of all the work that was starting from June up until now in September. The only challenge that we had to verify, make sure that there's a certificate of compliance that will be coming from the service provider to say, yes, we went to a school X, school B, this is what we have done. And the certificate will then come with an invoice to say, yes, you can proceed. But we also had to verify as the department that what we're paying interact with the schools to confirm that, yes, this is what has been done. Confirm with the district office, this has been done. That's why then the amount is alarming, because it was only paid now in September. But it's the work from June up until now in September.
Steve Mabona, you talk about invoices. 28 different companies were contracted to do this work. Where did you find them, and what qualified them to be specialists in this area?
Well, as per the advice, we went to the central supplier database of the National Treasury and got those companies there. But because at that time we were so pressured, and we had to make sure that capacity and the expertise rather, is the one that will then assisting us to make a call to say this person is appointed or this other is appointed. Because you will have 40 schools that were closed at the go. And you will then say, who is going to do this work? Go to the database, identify. People will be saying, no, I can manage to do this work, probably 3 schools, I can manage to do 3 schools, or I can manage to do 1 school. Others will take more. So the capacity of a service provider would have then determined who is going to be utilized more than the other. So
who did the work of verifying that these are legitimate companies, these are legitimate people who can do this work?
Well, we've got procurement processes. There are people that are responsible for this process in the department.
So you satisfied yourselves that these companies were adequately equipped and capacitated to carry out this work?
Indeed, because in all the work that was done, there's a certificate that says they complied. In all the work that they've done, the invoices were sent, they were verified, our officials interacted with the schools, interacted with the district office. Where work is done at head office, the officials at the head office are there, they know what has been done. So there's no payment that was done where there is no certification of compliance to say we have done this job.
Who checked against possible inflation of prices? Whose responsibility was that?
Well, the process is at the supply chain management and the office of the CFO. They will know, because there's a standard rate that are being utilized as per the information at our disposal. Yeah. So the standard rates that are utilized to say this square meterage will cost you so much, because it's about square meters. We're talking about offices, we're talking about classrooms, we're talking about a number of areas that would have been said we need to work in these areas. But remember, in the first instance, we were doing the entire school, we were doing the entire office.
So sitting here right now, Steve, I'm out of time. Sitting here right now, can you say without doubt that there was not a single service provider who inflated the price of disinfecting these schools?
Well, according to information at our disposal, we don't have a reason to suspect that. Information is there. It's just that the journalist who wrote the story, we provided information, but because if you have a story, then you want to cast aspersion. Yeah. You can't say there's a potential corruption. If you don't have anything, if you don't have any evidence that is supporting that.
Right.
So you can't just cast aspersion and say there is corruption, there's potential corruption, because you see the amount is 98 million, but you don't want to accept when we tell you that, no, but this 98 million is from June up until now.
Right.
All the invoices are captured,
Steve,
but you focus on the quantum without looking at all the facts that we are putting on the table.
Unfortunately, I am out of time, but I've got to put the question to you. Ultimately, 98 million rand was spent on this disinfection exercise. What was that amount initially earmarked for? Where was this money originally intended?
Remember, we had to reprioritize. COVID came and no one knew what.
Where did you take the money from in order to make it available for disinfection?
No, we had to look at the maintenance budget, because remember, on a continuous basis.
So it was taken from infrastructure projects?
Infrastructure project, maintenance, where you know that this one is not going to utilize, reprioritize, because that's what we said. So, because we are sitting with the pandemic, which we don't want to put the lives of our children at the stake, we then had to reprioritize and say, then let's utilize this money, make sure that we are safe. We're not going to be sitting with fatalities that will be coming because we would have not done what is expected of us. We would not allay fears from parents. We would have pushed and won cases at court to say we must open because the curriculum, year must be saved. We would have done that, but then we couldn't risk a fact that will be coming from the people saying so many people died in your space because you didn't do 1, 2, 3.
All right. Steve Mabona, we're going to leave it there. Hopefully you're correct that no monies were spent unnecessarily. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting here once again, and we will indeed invite you to come and answer to those allegations. All right. Let's thank you very much, Steve Mabona from the Basic Education Department here in Gauteng.